Entertainment Soldier and I'm back to talk about Masters of the Sky, Season 1, Episode 1, Apple's new Bomber series, and my thoughts on it. I really did enjoy this episode. I have been looking forward to this series because I loved Banner Brothers and the Pacific was... It was an okay series. I'm not going to say it was fantastic, but it was okay. So I am expecting a lot from this show, especially with it mostly being the same people who did those two shows. So I did like the episode. I thought it was a strong opening. The cast were all okay. Little bit of problems with the CGI. It's a bit hit and miss sometimes. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's obvious it's CGI. But the majority of it is okay. As for the story, it is massively interesting. I mean, the story behind the 100th bomber wing of the American Bombing Group is such an interesting story, especially when you find out how they got the name the Bloody 100. I mean, if you're going to make a bomber series, you should make it about these guys, which was really interesting to find out about them. I do kind of want to talk a little bit of history about, what America was at the beginning of the war to where they got to at the end. Little bit of history, won't go too much into detail. So, when America first got involved in the war and then came to England and said, they want to hurt the Germans and, win the war, their head of their bomber unit wanted to go with huge bombing forces, have 100 B-52s, the flying fortresses, in massive wings, head over to Germany, bomb the crap out of them, and then get back. Now, the RAF, the British, who've been fighting for a very long time, kind of warned the Americans, if you go in the day, it's a fucking death decision. Because the Germans, they are great in the skies. They also have a lot of anti-air defences. So the RAF kind of told the Americans, you should concentrate going on at night instead of the day. But the head of the bomber unit said, nope, going with big formations and we should be okay. So the Americans were going to go in massive formations that would stick close to each other, and all fortresses would be able to cover each other from the fighters from the Luftwaffe. Unfortunately, the first mission the American bomber went on was, I think, a disaster. Not a massive disaster, but most of the bomber wing that was sent, I think, was killed. And then America started to realise they have to still do these daytime bombings, but they need to become more smarter and, try to figure out different ways of dealing with the fighters. Until the P-55 came out, they had no fighter protection, and so it was very bloody for these bomber units. Just a little bit of history there. So I'm hoping we get more of the history about, the bomber crew in this series. I am kind of a bit sad that we don't have what we had in Pacific and the Band of Brothers, with old bomber crews explaining what it was like being a bomber pilot and the missions. I do kind of realise they are probably becoming a bit too old to do this now. Unfortunately, time's a bitch, and it is kind of sad. I would have liked it if they had somehow just had a little history lesson at the start of the episode. I don't know if they're not going to do it in the other episodes. I don't know. But for me, I would have appreciated that a little bit more. Because again, World War II history is massively interesting and kind of a little bit disappointed. But as a whole, episode 1, it was really interesting. I loved the story. A little bit slow in the middle, but, it's the first episode. I'm not expecting to be blown away. Again, Band of Brothers, Pacific, they all kind of started off slow, and then it got better after the first episode. So episode 1, what would I give it out of 10? I think a very strong 8. An 8 out of 10. It's a good episode, and I am looking forward to next week's episode. So, let's go to spoilers now. If you don't want to hear spoilers, leave in 3, 2, 1. Oh, I completely forgot. This is the first video I'm doing of the year, so Happy New Year, everybody. Just thought I'd say that. Happy New Year. Hope everything's going alright for everybody. Let's get to the spoilers. So, first part, we are in America, where we are introduced to Major Cleveland and Major Egon, or as their call signs are, Bucky and Buck. They're pretty much just having a little bit of fun before they head off to England to, fight the war. And, we get a little bit of backstory about them. They have girlfriends, blah, 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 blah. So, turns out Buck is heading off first to England to, set up the bomber group and do a couple of missions so that he can be ready to tell the 100th that come what it's like and everything, or at least get the fields in East Anglia ready for these bomber crews. Major Cleveland's kind of a bit annoyed he's having to wait, but he understands what he's being asked to do. He has one last night with his girlfriend. Then we go forward in time a little bit, where Buck, Major Egon, is doing his second bombing run into Germany, where it looks like his crew has been battered by the Luftwaffe and the anti-air. Couple of people get killed on his plane. They get back to England safely though. Plane's fucked up, a few crew injured, I think one died, and the other pilot who was with him kind of tells Major Egon not to tell the crews from the 100th about what it's like when they go on the runs, because if you tell them what it's like, that might scare the shit out of them and some might be a bit too nervous to fly. You can kind of understand where he's coming from. It's like you don't really want to tell them what it's like because it's fucking horrible, but at the same time you do kind of realise that would be very important information for somebody who's about to go on their first mission. We then go over to Greenland, where Major Cleveland is practicing flying with his air group. They're preparing to head back to land, but there's a lot of wind and they have to have an emergency landing. You then see a couple of other bombers struggle to land as well. He then goes into this pub on the island where everybody's enjoying themselves and having drinks and that. He gives a present to the owner of the bar because it turns out Major Egon broke a whale, what's it called? A whale horn, that's it, a whale's horn. And he sent Cleveland something to say sorry to the bartender, and it kind of like not really accepted because he did break something that was pretty rare, apparently. So the bomber crews from Cleveland head off to England to get ready to prepare for their missions into Germany and into the rest of Europe. We are then introduced to, I think it's Private Cross, who is a navigator on one of the bombers and who has to be the worst person to pick for a fucking bomber crew because it turns out he's got air sickness and he's throwing up all over the place. And this bomber is also having mechanical issues. They don't know where they are. They've lost their bomber group. So they're relying on the navigator to get them to England. Unfortunately, the navigator, Cross, is thrown up all over the place and is not really concentrating on the map. And he unfortunately fucks up really badly. It turns out he has led them all the way to fucking France. He's completely missed England, and they then start getting attacked by the German defences over France. I thought it was a really funny scene, and it is just like, how the fuck do you miss England? But what I love in this episode is they do show you how bad it is to be in the skies and in the clouds. It's like zero cover. I mean, it's like zero visibility. You can't see jack shit, and that is a massive, issue for pilots, and I kind of like that. So we go into England, East Anglia. I completely forgot the scene in the pub. I'll go through it quickly. Major Egon, he, having a party with the Irish and the English, he's made a bet with one of the Irish guys for 2 bikes that if this guy can hit the apple on his head with 1 dart, he wins their bikes. It's a person with Down syndrome. I don't consider this scene woke. I think some people might. It's not woke. I like seeing the guy with Down syndrome in the show. They're alright people. I kind of think sometimes they get a bit too harsh. Some people thinking it's woke to put them in shows and stuff. It's not. I don't think he did any damage to the show. I enjoyed it. Anyway, he throws a dart, hits the apple, and you can kind of tell Egon is really kind of worried that he might hit him with a dart, but he doesn't, and he gives him a hug. He wins the bike. He sings a little song whilst he heads back to camp about how shit English weather is. I can agree with that, especially right now with the fucking storm. Fuck's sake. But yeah, he gets back to camp with 2 bikes, and you got to remember this is England in the 1940s, where everything is in short supply, and I think bikes were very valuable in those days. I think there's even stories that I know from my great gran that used to tell me about how people used to nick things from people. The smallest fucking things that we take for granted these days, back then were very valuable, and you would literally kill somebody to get. Anyway, so the 100th bomber crew get to England. They all land safely. Unfortunately, Cross's bomber gets there late, but unfortunately they were in the cold for way too long. So when the pilot tries to land and put all of the landing gear down, turns out the right side of the plane's landing gear will not move. Turns out it's frozen over, because when they try to do the emergency crank landing, the person that's trying to do that informs the pilot it's frozen solid. So they have to do an emergency landing, which is the most dangerous thing you can do in a bomber, is an emergency landing, because you ain't got it's a belly landing. That's it. The worst thing you could do with a bomber is a belly landing, because you ain't got no idea what's going to happen if you do it, because the worst thing you can happen is it flipping over, or one of the wings collapses. It's like something you only ever do in an emergency. So he tells the crew to get ready for a crash landing. They all get to the middle of the plane, which is the safest part of the plane, and they belly land. The plane goes for a couple of miles, then stops. They all have to get the fuck out of that plane, because this is 1940s, new technology, these planes, and they do sometimes blow up for the smallest things. So they run, get away quickly. Turns out it's all alright. Emergency services get there. The plane doesn't blow up. And when Major Cleveland and Major Egon get to the plane, they're informed by the mechanics everything's okay. Just needs it just needs new propellers and shit, and a new bottom. So everything's okay. The pilot of the plane does tell the navigator, Cross, he needs to sort his shit out, because their reasons for being lost wasn't just his fault. The plane did have mechanical issues, but he should have been able to get them to England and not to fucking France. So, and they kind of need to stop throwing up, because that's also affecting his job. And Cross knows this. He does feel a bit guilty about it. Well, a lot guilty actually. And he meets up with his friend, and his friend kind of asks him, doesn't air sickness go away when you get into it? And Cross says, usually, but he kind of realizes that was in training. This is real life, and he's kind of thinking, is it going to get worse? Who knows? Anyway, so Major Egon gets brought to the boss, the colonel of the division, and the colonel is kind of given a bit of a telling off for not making his men make their beds and tidying up. Major Egon kind of explains to the colonel, my pilots are fantastic in the air. I'm not that concerned with, how they make their bed. But the colonel does remind the captain, it's not about making their bed, it's about, getting them more focused, getting them disciplined. This is more than just making their bed. And I can understand that. Ex-military, you got told this when you start your training, and as a kid you were like, oh, how is this going to help you? But when you go through training, it does focus you, it does make you more disciplined. So I do understand why that is important. I see Major Egon's point, because that was like me when I was there. Why is it so fucking important for me to make my bed, even though I was a good soldier? But it does turn out it does help with discipline and everything. And yeah, so the colonel gives him a telling off and informs him that the head of Bomber Command wants to get rid of a squadron, or not get rid of it, just like add two groups together, but they'd lose their name and their division name, and he doesn't want that to happen, because if that happens he loses his job basically. So he tells Major Egon to get his shit together basically, and dismisses him. So next scene, I forgot to mention, so when Major Egon leaves, the colonel then pukes up blood onto the file, and it looks like there is something wrong with the colonel, but he doesn't want to inform medical about it, because if he does, he will be not fired, but he won't be allowed to go on missions. And if you're a person from this time, and if you know the history of World War II, you knew a lot of soldiers who wanted to fight never told medical jack shit, basically, because they always knew there was a massive possibility that you would get, not thrown out, but you wouldn't be allowed to fight. And with World War II, nobody wants to be the guy left out, basically. Oh my god, I was just looking on my phone. Shooty Gat was in this. Holy shit, Shooty Gatwa. Oh, that's going to be very interesting. I'm sorry, I just found out. Wow, Shooty Gat was in this. He must be playing the Tuskegee Airmen then. Must be. That's going to be interesting. Anyway, back to the episode. So, next episode, everybody's gone to bed. Find out this is going to be the 101st mission over Germany. They all get woken up early and given the best breakfast they can get in the military. They call it what do they call it again? The Last Supper. That's what they call it. So they get their breakfast. Everybody's kind of a little bit nervous, first mission, nobody knows what's going to happen, so everybody's a bit on edge. You get this funny scene of a guy who spills salt on the table, and then one of the guys tells him to throw it over his right shoulder, ends up throwing the whole fucking thing over. It was a kind of funny scene, but you can tell a lot of people are nervous, including Major Cleveland. So they all finish their breakfast, head off to the briefing, where they're informed that they are heading into Germany to bomb the submarine pens because of the amount of damage that the submarine corps of Germany is doing to the shipping that's coming to the UK. Bit of backstory about the submarines. Submarines are literally the worst weapon the Germans ever created. That's even, bigger than the Tiger and the V2 rockets, because they were so fucking effective. If you know history about Churchill, they were the only thing that scared the shit out of him. So the Americans and the British would mainly concentrate on the German U-boat pens because they were just so dangerous. And historians do say if Hitler had majorly focused on making U-boats, he could have won the war. So these are very important targets for the Allies to hit. And there's especially a really interesting story about a pen in France that was so impossible to destroy that it survived the entire war, even though the RAF and the American Air Force tried to destroy that so many times. Anyway, back to the episode. So they get the briefing, and they then get told, the 100th, that they are going to be in the back of the bomber group, I think. And that's literally the worst place to be placed, because you're definitely going to be attacked by the German Luftwaffe. So after debriefing, they head to their planes, they all get ready. Major Cleveland is going to be put with a new crew, and they're going to head off and hopefully destroy the pen. So they get the signal to head off. All the planes get up in the sky. Once they all get into the American bomber formation, the big wings basically the big wings are all the flying fortresses have to stay really close to each other to make sure they cover each other from the Luftwaffe. And whilst they're preparing to get to Germany, they're all dealing with the clouds and there's really bad visibility. So Cleveland tells one of the guys on his plane to fire a flare off in the plane, and there's a special place where the flare is, where they fire the flare off. They fire it, and it turns out one of the flying fortresses was very close to his plane, so it was lucky they fired off a flare, because there was nearly a collision in the skies. But they sort it out, the planes get back in formation and head off to the target. Whilst they're heading off, one of the bombers unfortunately has a malfunction on one of their engines, which is slowing down half the group and is making the formation weaker. So Major Cleveland tells the head of the plane, can you continue or are you going back? You've got to make a decision. The guys don't want to be sent back because, again, they want to fight. But if they're holding up their part of the group, they're becoming a danger to the mission. So the pilot reluctantly says they're heading back to England. They fall out of formation and tell one of the other planes in that 6 plane group to take the lead. And now this group has to somehow get back into formation in time for the bombing run. When they get near the target, the Germans pretty much see them or hear them, get to their defences, start firing the flak. They get over the target, but unfortunately the colonel, who's also with them on the mission, he scrubs the mission because they can't see the target because of zero visibility. He scraps it, tells them all to head back. Unfortunately, this means that it's a failed mission, and they now got to dump all of their bombs into the English Channel, which it turns out they did a lot, because there's so many bombs in the English Channel. They haven't even found like 10% of them. Like, so many bombs down there. Anyway, so whilst they're heading back, the flak's going off, and then they see the flak stop. And this can only mean one thing: the Luftwaffe are here. And it turns out, yes, they are. They come in fast to attack the first couple of planes, but then it looks like the Germans have realised that one of the formations is lagging behind. And that is now a death sentence to a lot of those pilots. So the Luftwaffe attack those planes. They're able to wipe out 3 flying fortresses, which means the death of 30 men. And it turns out that the first mission the 100th went on was a failure and one of their most bloody, at least their first really bloody mission. So when they get back, they all pissed off about having, not hit the target and the loss of their men. The colonel of the 100th collapses unconscious, and they all get told, calm down, get ready to be debriefed, and we'll sort everything out after, you're debriefed. So everybody's pretty much feeling a bit shit. They all head off for the debrief, and then that's how the episode ends. We get a little clip of next week's episode, which we find out you're going to hear about the RAF and how they do their night bombing, and how there is a bit of friction between the RAF and American Air Force. So I am looking forward to the episode. This episode, 8 out of 10. I really did enjoy it. I can't wait for next week's episode. So yeah, strong beginning means strong start. Let's hope they keep it up. And yeah, good episode. So that's the end of my review. If you like this review, give it a like. If you dislike this review, give it a dislike. And if you like my content, do think about subscribing. And if you have a comment, leave it below and I'll try to get back to it. Entertainment World Soldier. Bye.